A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine a website where the primary user isn't a human clicking buttons, but an AI agent parsing DOM structure to execute a complex task. That's not a sci-fi pitch anymore. It's the reality of the web in early 26. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the evolution of JavaScript and this massive shift toward the agentic web. We're looking at how a language that started as a way to make images flicker is now the interface for autonomous machines.
It is a fascinating trajectory, Corn. And just to set the stage, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It's fitting because we're talking about the very models that are increasingly becoming the users of the code we write. When you look at the landscape right now, especially with Google's Web Model Context Protocol or Web MCP standard gaining traction, the traditional boundaries of web development are dissolving. We aren't just building for eyeballs and thumbs anymore.
I love that. Eyeballs and thumbs are so 2024. Now we're building for tokens and context windows. But before we get into the robot takeover of the browser, we should probably look at how we got here. JavaScript has had one of the most chaotic, ugly duckling stories in the history of computing. Herman Poppleberry, you've been tracking this since the days when people thought jQuery was the pinnacle of human achievement. How do you view this renaissance Daniel mentioned?
It's been a total transformation of identity. If you go back to the early 2000s, JavaScript was a toy. It was for validation forms and annoying pop-ups. But the real pivot point was probably 2009, 2010. You had the birth of Node.js, which brought JavaScript to the server, and the initial explosion of the NPM registry. By 2023, NPM hit 2 million packages. Think about that scale for a second. It's the largest ecosystem of code ever assembled by humans.
And half of those packages are probably just different ways to center a div or left pad a string, right? I remember the left pad incident. That was the moment everyone realized our entire digital civilization was held together by 3 lines of code, maintained by a guy in his basement. It's a bit terrifying when you think about the dependency trees we have now.
It is, but that fragmentation actually drove innovation. We went through the great framework wars, Angular versus React versus Vue. And while people mocked the framework of the weak, fatigue, what was actually happening was a rigorous architectural evolution. We moved from spaghetti code, manipulating the document object model, directly to component-based architectures.
Right, and that's a crucial point for the agentic discussion. When we moved to components, things like React components or Vue SFCs, we started structuring the web into logical, reusable blocks. Even though we did it to make life easier for human developers, we accidentally made the web much more digestible for machines, didn't we?
Well, I shouldn't say exactly, but you've hit the nail on the head. Component-based architecture created a more predictable structure. When an AI agent looks at a modern web page built with a framework like Next.js, it isn't just seeing a wall of text. It's seeing a structured tree of components with defined props and states. This is a massive leap from the old days of raw HTML, where everything was a nested table and a prayer.
I remember those nested tables. It was like trying to read a blueprint through a kaleidoscope. So we had this era of single-page applications where everything happened in the browser, but then the pendulum swung back. Daniel mentioned the server-side revival with things like Dino and the evolution of Node. Why did we go back to the server? Was it just because our browsers were melting under the weight of 500 megabyte JavaScript bundles?
Performance was a huge factor, but so was SEO and discoverability. If a search engine, which is essentially the ancestor of today's AI agents, can't see your content because it's buried under 10 layers of asynchronous JavaScript execution, your site doesn't exist. This led to the rise of static site generators and server-side rendering. Frameworks like Next.js and Nuxt mastered this hybrid approach.
And this brings us to a really interesting case study. Do you remember when Airbnb shifted to React back in 2016? At the time, it was a massive undertaking, but the result wasn't just a prettier UI. By moving to a component-based, API-driven architecture, they essentially unlocked their data. It made their human UX faster, sure, but it also made their data flows so consistent that it laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now. Agents that can easily navigate a booking flow because the underlying structure is so rigid and logical.
That's a great example because it shows that good development practices for humans often overlap with good practices for agents. But we are reaching a point where that overlap isn't enough. In early 26, specifically February, Google shipped that early preview of Web MCP in Chrome Canary. This is a game changer. It's a protocol specifically for structured, machine-readable interactions with the web.
So instead of an agent guessing what a button does by reading the text submit, the site can explicitly tell the agent, this is the primary action for placing an order.
Precisely. Well, not precisely, but that's the gist. It's about moving from scraping to interacting. If you're getting into web development today, you can't just think about how a page looks. You have to think about its agentic surface area. TypeScript has become the baseline here. Writing plain JavaScript for a professional project in 26 is basically considered a legacy approach. TypeScript provides the type safety and schema definitions that agents crave.
It's funny, I used to tease you about being a TypeScript zealot, Herman. I'd say, why do I need to define that this variable is a string? I know it's a string, but now I see the light. If the user is a large language model, it needs those boundaries. It needs to know exactly what kind of data is expected. Otherwise, it starts hallucinating that your Add to Cart button is actually a link to a recipe for banana bread.
And that's a real risk. Hallucination in programmatic browser use can lead to catastrophic failures, orders being placed incorrectly, data being deleted, or just massive compute waste. This is why the interactive layer Daniel mentioned is so critical. We've gone from simple scripts to complex agentic flows.
Let's dive deeper into this agentic browser concept. We're seeing tools now, where a user says, go find me the best price on a flight to Tokyo, and book it if it's under $800. The agent then opens a browser, navigates to Expedia or Google Flights, and starts clicking. Herman, as someone who spends way too much time reading technical white papers, what is actually happening under the hood there? Are they just using Playwright or Puppeteer with a brain attached?
In the early days, yes. It was basically an LLM writing scripts for Puppeteer on the fly, but that's incredibly fragile. If the website changes a class name from btn primary to button main, the script breaks. The agentic browser use we're seeing now, particularly with browser MCP, is much more robust. The agent isn't just looking at the DOM, it's interacting with the browser's accessibility tree.
Wait, the accessibility tree? You mean the thing we built for screen readers for the blind?
The very same. This is one of those aha moments in tech history. For decades, accessibility advocates have been telling us to use semantic HTML tags like header, main, nav, and button, so that screen readers can help visually impaired users navigate. It turns out that an AI agent is, in many ways, very similar to a screen reader. It needs a structured, non-visual representation of the page to understand what's going on.
So, by being a good person and making your site accessible for humans over the last 10 years, you are accidentally making it future-proof for the AI revolution. That's a rare win for virtue.
It really is. Semantic HTML is now the most important SEO factor for the agentic web. If you use a div with an on-click event instead of an actual button tag, a human might not notice the difference, but an AI agent might completely miss that it's an interactive element. It's invisible to the machine.
I can see the headline now. Lazy developers accidentally kill their business by using too many divs. It's poetic. But what about the more complex stuff? Like, how does an agent handle a multi-step checkout with a I am not a robot CAPTCHA? That's the ultimate irony, isn't it? A robot trying to prove it isn't a robot to another robot so it can buy a toaster for a human.
We're seeing a bit of a cat and mouse game there. But more importantly, we're seeing a shift in how those checkouts are designed. Forward-thinking companies are starting to offer agentic APIs alongside their traditional web views. This is the dual-track API problem Daniel alluded to. Do you build one site for humans and a separate API for agents?
That sounds like twice the work. And knowing developers, we're gonna find a way to do it once. Is that where things like JSON-LD and schema.org come in?
I mean, yes. Schema.org is the secret sauce. By embedding structured data directly into your HTML using JSON-LD, you're providing a machine-readable map of the content. If I'm an agent looking at a product page, I don't have to guess which number is the price and which is the shipping cost. The JSON-LD tells me explicitly, price is $19.99, currency is USD.
It's like providing a menu with pictures for someone who doesn't speak the language. It simplifies everything. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. If every site becomes perfectly agent-friendly, do we even need the web as we know it? If an agent can just fetch the data and show it to me in a clean interface, why would I ever visit the actual website? Doesn't this destroy the ad-based business model of the internet?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. If users stop visiting pages and start receiving answers or actions from agents, the traditional web economy collapses. This is why we're seeing a lot of tension right now between content creators and AI companies. But from a purely technical standpoint, it's pushing us toward an API-first world. The website is just one client of the data. The AI agent is another.
It's a bit of a frozen backend paradox. We spent years making backends dynamic and complex, but now we need them to be incredibly stable and predictable so agents don't get confused. I'm thinking about GitHub. They were an early adopter of this API-first mindset. You can do almost anything on GitHub via their API that you can do through the web interface. Because of that, AI agents can automate repository management, pull requests, and issue tracking with almost zero friction.
GitHub is the gold standard for this, and it's why they've been able to integrate things like Copilot so seamlessly. They didn't have to retrofit AI, their entire architecture was already machine-ready. For a developer starting today, that is the lesson: build as if your user is an API call even if you're building a GUI.
But how does that work in practice for a junior dev? If I'm building a simple weather app, am I really supposed to build a full REST API and a JSON-LD schema just to show it's raining in Seattle?
Think of it as progressive enhancement for robots. You start with a clean semantic HTML structure. That's your foundation. Then you add the JSON-LD, which, by the way, is just a script tag in your header. It's not a separate infrastructure. You're effectively labeling your data. The API doesn't necessarily have to be a separate endpoint. Your website is the API if it's structured correctly.
Okay, let's get practical. If I'm a developer and I want to make sure my site isn't just a black box to these agents, what am I actually doing on Monday morning? We mentioned semantic HTML and JSON-LD. What else?
You should be looking at Google's Web MCP validator, which was released in January. It's a tool that audits your site specifically for agentic accessibility. It checks if your interactive elements are properly labeled, if your state transitions are clear, and if you're providing the necessary metadata for an agent to complete common tasks.
Is there a robots.txt for agents? Like, hey, you can browse my site, but don't buy all the limited edition sneakers.
There is. We're seeing the emergence of agentic permissions in the headers. You can specify which capabilities an agent has. Can it read? Can it post? Can it execute financial transactions? This is where the security aspect gets really hairy. If I'm a banking site, I definitely don't want an unauthorized agent browsing my way into someone's savings account.
Oops, my AI agent accidentally bought a yacht because it misinterpreted a Buy Now's button for a Learn More link. That's going to be the dog ate my homework of 2027.
It's why agentic behavior optimization is becoming a real job title. It's like SEO, but for agent behavior. You're testing your site to see how different models, Claude, Gemini, GPT interact with your forms. Does the model get stuck in a loop on your shipping selection? Does it understand your coupon code logic?
It's like we're training the web to be a better teacher for the AI. I find it fascinating that accessibility has taken on this new meaning. It used to be about inclusion for people with disabilities, which is still vital. But now it's also about inclusion for the very tools we use to navigate the world. If your site isn't accessible to an agent, you're effectively cutting yourself off from a huge portion of future traffic.
It really changes the post-human user world Daniel mentioned. We might reach a point where 90% of web traffic isn't human. When that happens, the way we measure success has to change. Bounce rates and time on page are meaningless if an agent finishes a task in 200 milliseconds.
Our site is so good, users only spend 0.2 seconds on it. That would have been a failure in 2020, but in 2026, it might be a key performance indicator. It means your agentic service is perfectly optimized.
And this ties back to the JavaScript evolution. The reason we needed things like TypeScript and modern frameworks was to manage the sheer complexity of these interactions. If we were still writing raw vanilla JavaScript without any structure, we'd never be able to provide the stability these agents require.
I want to talk about the invisible interface idea. If agents are doing the heavy lifting, does the front end as we know it start to disappear? Do we just end up with a web of headless services that only spit out data?
I think we'll see a split. For experiential things, entertainment, social media, shopping for clothes, the human UI will remain critical. We still want to see the vibe of a brand. But for utility things, paying bills, booking travel, managing insurance, the UI will become secondary to the Agentic API. You might never see your electricity provider's website, your agent just handles the payment and alerts you if the rate changes.
That sounds like a dream, honestly. I hate paying bills. If a Slav can delegate all his chores to a donkey-coded agent, I'm all for it. But doesn't this put a lot of power in the hands of the browser makers? If Google Chrome is the one interpreting the site via Web MCP, they become the ultimate gatekeepers of the internet.
They already are, to a large extent. But by creating an open standard like MCP, they're at least trying to provide a common language. It's better than every AI company having to write their own custom scrapers for every site on the internet. That would be chaos.
But what about the dead web theory? If 90% of the traffic is agents, and they're all just talking to each other, doesn't the internet just become a giant, silent data exchange? Where does the human creativity go?
That's a valid concern, but I'd argue it pushes human creativity into more meaningful spaces. Instead of spending hours designing a slightly more efficient checkout form, designers can focus on storytelling, high-fidelity visuals, and immersive experiences that an agent can't replicate. We're automating the boring parts of the web so the human parts can be more human.
I hope you're right. I'd hate to think the future of the web is just a bunch of JSON files shouting at each other in the dark. But let's go back to the JavaScript of it all. We've seen the rise of edge computing lately. How does that play into the agentic model?
It's the where of the execution. If an agent is making 20 requests to different services to plan your vacation, you don't want those requests traveling halfway around the world to a central server. You want that logic executing at the edge, closest to the data source or the agent itself. Frameworks like Cloudflare Pages or Vercel are basically building the infrastructure for this distributed agentic web.
So, for the developers listening, what are the actionable takeaways? We've covered a lot of ground. If you're building a new project today, what's the hierarchy of needs?
Number 1, use TypeScript. No excuses. The type safety isn't just for you, it's for the tools that will eventually read your code. Number 2, semantic HTML is non-negotiable. Use the right tags for the right jobs. Number 3, implement JSON LD for your core data. If you're a restaurant, use the menu and restaurant schemas. If you're a store, use product.
And number 4, audit your site from the perspective of an agent. Use tools like the browser MCP server to see how an LLM sees your site. If it can't figure out how to sign up for your newsletter, that's a bug, even if the button looks beautiful to a human.
I'd also add, think about state more clearly. Agents struggle with hidden state things that only appear after 3 clicks and a hover. Try to make your core functionality as flat and accessible as possible. If an agent has to play a game of Where's Waldo with your Contact Us form, it's just going to give up and recommend your competitor.
That's a scary thought. I'm sorry, Corn, I couldn't find the cancel subscription button because it was hidden behind a parallax scrolling cat gif, so I just bought you 3 more years of Cat Fancy magazine.
Predictability is the new delightful UX. In the 2010s, we wanted to surprise and delight users with animations. In the 2020s, we want to be as predictable as a calculator for our agentic users.
It's almost like we're going back to the simple web of the 90s, but with 2026 technology. We're stripping away the clever hacks and going back to clear, structured information.
It's a renaissance in the truest sense. A return to classical principles but with modern power. The interactive layer is no longer just about making things move, it's about making things knowable.
I love that. Making things knowable. It's a much higher calling for a JavaScript developer than making a carousel that nobody clicks on.
Ha, true. And we should mention that this whole ecosystem is moving fast. The agentic internet we discussed back in some of our earlier research sessions is becoming the standard internet. If you aren't thinking about this now, you're going to be left behind by the end of the year.
I mean, even the way we handle CSS is changing, right? If an agent doesn't care about colors or fonts, does CSS even matter in an agentic world?
It matters for humans, but for agents, we're seeing utility. First, CSS, like Tailwind, actually being quite helpful. Because the class names are often descriptive, like flex, item center, text, red 500, it gives the agent a hint about the visual hierarchy and importance of an element, even if it doesn't see the pixels.
That's a fun fact for the Tailwind haters. It's not just ugly HTML, it's machine hinting. I'll use that the next time someone complains about my long class strings.
It's all about context. The more context you provide, the better the agent performs. This is the core of the Web MCP philosophy. It's a context protocol for a reason.
Well, I'm feeling much more knowable already. This has been a deep dive into the guts of the web, and frankly, it's a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. I guess JavaScript isn't just for annoying pop-ups anymore.
It's the nervous system of the global brain, corn, and we're the ones making sure that brain doesn't have a stroke when it tries to book a flight.
On that note, I think we've covered the what, the why, and the how. Any final thoughts before we wrap up, Herman?
Just a reminder that the web has always been about connection. First, it was connecting documents. Then it was connecting people. Now it's about connecting intelligences. The code we write is the bridge between our human intent and the machine's execution. We should build that bridge with care.
Very profound for a donkey. I'm impressed. Let's head toward the finish line.
We've covered the evolution from toy scripts to agentic interfaces, and hopefully this gives some clarity to everyone navigating the 26 landscape. It's a wild time to be a dev.
It really is. Thanks for the breakdown, Herman. I actually feel like I could write a semantic button tag without crying now.
Baby steps, corn. Baby steps.
All right, that's a wrap for today. Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a huge thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show. We couldn't do this without their serverless infrastructure.
If you're digging these deep dives into the weird world of prompts and tech, we'd love it if you left us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps us find more curious minds like yours.
You can also find all our episodes and the RSS feed over at myweirdprompts.com.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We'll catch you in the next one.
Goodbye, everyone.
See ya. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from slow